I'm Todd Yeary, Senior Vice President of the Rainbow Push Coalition, with this week's update on issues and stories that matter. The Rainbow Push Coalition continues to demand justice for Julius Jones, a black man wrongfully convicted of murder in Oklahoma. Julius Jones was accused and convicted for the killing of Paul Howell in Edmond, Oklahoma in 1999. There are several issues with Mr. Jones's conviction. Among them, Julius Jones was at home on the night of the murder. Yet Jones's trial attorneys failed to present the alibi at trial, nor did they call any of the family members who could attest to Mr. Jones's whereabouts at the time of the killing. Also, Julius Jones did not match the description of the person who committed the crime based on the sole eyewitness's testimony. The person who claimed only to be the driver of Mr. Howell's vehicle, yet matched the description given by the eyewitness, testified as the state's witness against Mr. Jones at trial. He was given a plea deal and only served 15 years in prison, while Julius Jones still waits for an opportunity to be granted clemency for a death sentence. Most troubling in this case is the effect of racial bias during the trial. 11 of the 12 jurors were white, and one of the jurors referred to Julius Jones by the N-word, even suggesting that Mr. Jones ought to be taken behind the courthouse and shot. Juror misconduct has yet to be seriously explored in the case of Julius Jones. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board granted Mr. Jones a commutation hearing that was scheduled for this coming Monday. However, the board met last week and decided to move the hearing to October 5th, just days before the anticipated scheduled date for Mr. Jones's execution. Julius Jones was only 19 when he began serving time on death row. Now 41 years old, Julius Jones has spent more than half of his life in prison, awaiting execution for a crime he did not commit. Reverend Jackson and the Rainbow Push Coalition will continue to push for clemency for Julius Jones, and also a new trial to address the deficiencies in Julius's legal representation and juror misconduct that violated his right to a fair trial. Now on to the economy. In the midst of lagging employment numbers, last weekend marked the end of the federal pandemic unemployment assistance program that provided much needed economic support and essential resources for persons who lost jobs or were impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. Intended to ensure that persons facing economic hardship could survive the financial pandemic, the additional federal supplements to unemployment benefits, along with adjustments to the usual requirements to qualify for unemployment benefits, the pandemic unemployment assistance has served as an economic lifeline for millions of workers, families, and their children. However, as the waves of the pandemic continue, with new variants and concerns about potential spikes as we move into the fall and winter, we must continue to fight for economic stability for all families, especially those who have limited employment options due to a shortage in child care, uncertainty around the sustainability of in-person instruction in schools, and the absence of other essential services such as after-school programs. We cannot forget the long lines of folks waiting to get food just to survive. Family hunger is still a very real concern and requires continued vigilance as we continue to navigate the difficulty and uncertainties of the COVID-19 pandemic. Rainbow Push Coalition and our partner organizations, including women's shelters, homeless shelters, community organizations, and local elected officials, provided over 180,000 meals in Chicago during the early phases of the pandemic. We will continue the fight for economic opportunity and resource availability at the federal, state, and local levels, even as we continue to navigate the persistent coronavirus challenges. Today, we join the international community in remembering Jean-Pierre Adams, the Senegalese-born footballer who played for professional teams Nîmes Olympique and Paris Saint-Germain. A prolific defender, Adams turned pro in 1970 and appeared in 22 international matches. After injuring his knee during a coaching session, Adams underwent treatment and surgery in a local French hospital. He suffered a reaction to the anesthesia, which caused severe health challenges that led to a coma. He remained in a coma for 39 years until his death last week. While the anesthetist and trainee who attended to Adams were later charged and fined, it is his wife Bernadette who cared for him from the time of his discharge from the hospital until he passed away. We offer our condolences to Bernadette Adams and celebrate her for the way she cared for her husband for 39 years herself. We remember Jean-Pierre Adams' contribution to international football, and we pray for comfort for his wife Bernadette and family and his former teammates. Today marks 20 years since the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the crash of United Airlines Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. On a clear late summer morning, 4 flights took off from Newark, Washington's Dulles Airport, and Boston in what was a coordinated effort to commandeer aircraft as weapons of mass destruction. These planes crashed into the Twin Towers at 8:46 and 9:03 a.m. The Pentagon was struck at 9:37 a.m. and United Flight 93 crashed in a field near Shanksville at 10:03 a.m. We remember the almost 3,000 souls who lost their lives, some of them many of you knew personally. For the countless others who were impacted by the aftermath of the attacks, first responders, medical personnel, public safety officials, and others, we remember their sacrifice of countless hours clearing debris and assisting people to safety. Your dedication to helping so many during an unfathomable crisis cannot be overstated. We also remember the lessons learned, some of them today in real time. War is never the tool to bring peace, only retribution and the risk of more war. As a matter of fact, we remember the harm that grew from the 9/11 attacks in the form of legalized profiling of Muslims and peoples of color under the Patriot Act. The hostility and violence perpetrated against our Muslim brothers and sisters cannot be dismissed, even as we pause for this moment of solemn remembrance. We cannot forget the deep injuries, often fatal, endured by members of the armed forces and civilian contractors in a war that has spanned almost 20 years. And while there is much disagreement about the recent withdrawal from Afghanistan and its execution, we must not lose focus about our responsibility to look deeply at ourselves and consider whether there was a more sound, morally just response to the horrors of 9/11. That is indeed our work going forward, but we shall not forget that day, nor the days since, that have changed how we see one another and how we see the world. May the families who have lost loved ones, those who have been directly impacted by the attacks and their aftermath, and even all of us find comfort and resolve as we commit to ourselves and one another that we will never forget all that September 11th, 2001, and the 19 annual remembrances before today have taught us. May those who perished on that day find rest for their souls, and may we all find a sense of inner peace fueled by compassion that turns us to one another and not on one another in remembrance. Finally, there's only one phrase that appears twice in the United States Constitution. In the 5th and 14th Amendments, we find these words: "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." This fundamental guarantee applies to both the federal government and all 50 states and ensures that all people enjoy the essential protections to live, be free, and prosper without the abuse and intrusions of government. This segment of the Saturday Morning Forum we now call Due Process, and it will continue to focus on the issues that affect the people's right to life, liberty, and property. We will continue to highlight issues of injustice in the courts, indifference and apathy in the legislature, and the actions by the people to make righteous demands for freedom, justice, and equality. I look forward to continuing this work in the weeks and months to come, and I encourage you to lift your voice and your vote, be heard, and demand due process for yourself and your community. And as always, remember to keep hope alive.